Hello. So we started something. Last week we started this new journey as we began to look at God's new people. A theme that we're talking about at Second Baptist Church in the middle room as we're exploring and navigating faith and navigating time as a church, as a faith body, as a community of faith. And so this is our second week. And our second week is focused on a chosen race. A chosen race. You're going to see that again in a moment. But it's not something that you would think. At least it wasn't something that I thought. Just like I look at a book, as I looked at the title, was nothing like I was about to experience for this week. And throughout the rest of this session, or our time together, I'm hoping that you get to experience, or you'd like to experience, a little something that I experienced this week. This week was different. I said it in Sunday school class today. I'm going to say it to you in our virtual world. This week was different for me. So today's lesson comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And this particular theme for this lesson today, or this week I should say, is called the chosen race. So we begin with our scripture reading. In this particular instance, the reading comes from the New International Version, so that's up on the screen. But it says here, a living stone and a holy people. We begin with chapter 2, verse 1. So put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Verse 2 says, like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. Verse 3, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. How powerful is verses 1 through 3? Without getting into some elongated speech, verses 1 through 3, we just heard it. You know, when I became a Christian, having received Christ into my heart, and to even be a Christian now, I have to change. I have to change. I'm not the only one that's got to change. For all of you that are watching this, you have to undergo, or you had to undergo, the same transformation. As we become Christians, or as we live as Christians, we have to renew, change, in the face of everything else that's going on in the world. Much like we talked about last week with salvation, we're reborn. I don't remember much about my childhood, being born. Some say they do. I suppose that's the case, but not me. However, I do remember when I accepted Jesus Christ. And even today, as an aging man, I still remember what it's like to renew on a daily basis. Not to fool anyone. I'm a work in progress like others. I have my own downfalls and pitfalls and things of that nature. But that's what Peter is telling us in verses 1 through 3. Change. We are going to change. We have to change. As a Christian, you are going to change. We have to change. Let me ask you something. How much do you value your faith? You can read that on the screen. But I want you to think to yourself for a moment. This has been an interesting question for me all week long. As I mentioned in our Sunday school class on this Sunday, today, this week has been different for me. But this question has been a principal question that's driven me throughout the week. How much do you value your faith? Well, I can tell you this, friends. Going through this scripture lesson for the week, it's changed the way I've eaten this week. It's changed the way that I've slept. It's changed the way I interact with people throughout the week. And I think that that's powerful. So to get back to the principal question, how do you value your faith? For me, and I can't speak for all of you, but for me, it comes home like truth after this week. This burning sensation in my stomach that I can't explain, but it feels like it's the right thing, and I'm just following it. I value that, and I'm okay with that. Call me whatever you like, and I'm okay with that. Our next scripture segment begins with verse 4. And verse 4 says, "As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious." Verse 5, "You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Christ." There were two big pieces that we really focused on inside Sunday school today. The lesson, The Chosen Race, is broken down into four components, essentially. One was already discussed in verses 1 through 3, and that was spiritual preparedness. But now after verses 4 through 10, essentially, when you get into those verses and you start to talk about two of the fundamental pieces that Peter was teaching. Peter is reaching out to those that are on the fringes, the outcasts, the misfits, the aliens, the exiles, right? My type of people. Living stones. We talked about that in class today. We talk about that now. Scripture talked about it. You just heard it. Living stones. As Christians, as faith followers, we are those living stones. And it's through us. It is through us that we build up that spiritual foundation. We become the church. We are the church. We are the living church. I never thought about that prior to going into this week's lesson. I never thought about that. All throughout my upbringing, I do recall loving Christ serving, caring, sharing. I never thought for one second, even now, it boggles my mind that I've gotten to a point where I can consider myself a living stone and understand what that means. It took all the way to the Epistle of Peter to get to this. And what an eye-opening experience, the living stone. We talked about that. We talked about members of the church. We talked about becoming a nation. We talked about that holy priesthood that we have access to. We talked about having access to the cornerstone, and that's our next piece. We had access to that cornerstone. You know, I brought it up in class today that in ancient times, typically whoever owned a building as a building was built, their name was etched into a stone, and that was the cornerstone. It was who owned the building. Symbolically, for the church, there is but one cornerstone and one owner, and that is Jesus Christ himself. And we're here. We're talking about it. And that's what we talked about today. Living stones. Members of the church. Faith followers that are there. You know, you can't do this stuff individually. If you're a follower or a reader of William Barclay, he really inundates that. You're not going to be able to do this alone. If you're going to do the Christian thing, you've got to be prepared to do the Christian thing. I never thought about this stuff, and I really get fired up on just this new knowledge, it seems. It's almost this week was, again, a different week for me. And I'm hoping that as we're going through this, it's starting to open up for your mindfulness. Hopefully, as we're reading this scripture, it's opening up your heart a little more. When do you settle for good, but not best? What may seem like a simple question has had me very, very off kilter this week. Just asking myself, when is it that I settle for good, but not best? And is that acceptable? Is there something more that I'm supposed to be doing? Is there something more that you're supposed to be doing? So think about that question as you live out through your day, as you're pondering about our scripture reading for the week. When do you settle for good, but not best? Verse 6 says, "For it stands in Scripture, Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." Verse 7 says, "So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." Verse 8, "And a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do." In the last segment that we just discussed, we talked about Christ being rejected. Fast forward from Peter's time to now, that rejection's still there. I think that even as a church, this faith follower, this Christian nation, I think that means something. And what does that mean? The last scripture piece that we talked about was men stumbling and falling because they disobeyed. I struggle with this on a daily basis. Obedience is something that I'm working on. So what is it, as you've heard that scripture reading, that segment, what is it that you're having difficulty with? What does unity look like? You don't have to have an answer to that right now. But based off what you've heard and what we've read so far in Scripture, there's a little more to go, but based on what you've heard, based on what you've lived, maybe some of your experiences, based off of that, what does unity look like? Verse 9 says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. We talked about it in our Sunday school class today, that when you step into Second Baptist Church, you're going to undoubtedly receive a hello. How has your week been? You're going to receive that from a greeter, a living stone at Second Baptist Church. You're going to see smiles. You're going to hear about people's lives from their week. You're going to hear these things. I just asked about what does unity look like. Following that question came verses 9 and 10 of our scripture reading for the week. How powerful were those two verses? I hope those two verses impacted you the way they impacted me, because what I took away from that was that Peter was teaching us, in Peter's writing right then and there, is that as we receive Christ as a church, as a people, as a race of Christians or faith followers, how interesting that we all receive the light of Christ, the light of God himself, the wisdom of God himself. How powerful is that? As a church, that is what we receive. That is open to us. I told you that this week has been different for me. I hope this week and what you're getting out of this is gonna be different for you. Being called to Christianity, receiving Christ into our hearts, as we talked about last week, Peter says that we have to be prepared. We have got to be prepared. We have got to be prepared to be different. We have to be different. We are different. For we are followers of Christ. We are the living stones that form the body. We make that up. And finally, we come to the last of our scripture for this week. verse 11 and 12. Verse 11 says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul." Verse 12 says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So we've come to the end of the chosen race. We've come to the end of our weekly segment here. I can't explain enough how eye-opening, how mind-opening, how heart-opening this week was. Just in preparation for teaching the Sunday school class. For those in the virtual world, if you're ever around Memphis, Tennessee, and you'd like to come and hear our wonderful pastor, Stephen Cook, and what message he brings to the congregation as a whole on Sundays, those doors are always open to you. If you ever like to experience what we're working on in that middle room, those formations in that middle room, those doors are always open to you. You can always, you're always welcome into our Sunday school class. And that's any Sunday school class at Second Baptist Church. That's any Sunday school class. Next week we're going to talk about a steadfast shepherd. We're going to be reading from the book of 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. If you'd like to go ahead and prepare yourselves, by all means. Again, that's 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. I hope you got a little something out of this week's scripture reading and a little mindfulness of what it was like to read through 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. From just a regular old guy. Go with God. See you.